Welcome back. Today we have an extra special treat for everybody. My guest today has been a board-certified addiction psychiatrist for over 30 years. He is currently a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. He has been at a ton of places, including VAs, other educational institutions. He is a part of this community for a long time. He is the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse, and he is currently the president of Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. My guest today, Bryon Adinoff. What's going on, Bryon?
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much for for coming on the show and for being a part of this with us. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate you dealing with our technical difficulties this morning. It's sometimes it's a little bit hairy when you're new at this and you're trying to figure out new stuff. But that's like with anything, right? The only way is through.
That's right. It was no problem.
Okay. No, that's awesome. That's good to hear. So I'm super excited to have you on the show, man. I'm as everyone knows, I'm a pharmacist by trade, and very, very much so affected by the opiate crisis and by the by cannabis regulation and everything that we have going on here. I think that you have a very unique perspective on this stuff, and I'm so excited to get into it today. So just tell us, give the listeners a little bit of background on your story about how you decided to become a physician and how you specifically wanted to get into addiction medicine.
Well, I guess how I became a physician partly was being born Jewish. For those of you who are familiar with people coming from that background, we're often taught we can be a lawyer or a doctor, and that was certainly true for me. But though I planned going into medical school, it wasn't until I had some really profound experiences with psychedelics when I was in college that got me very interested in how chemicals affect the brain, and became more committed to that route. And in fact, that's what I did. I went into medical school, became a psychiatrist because that was the best way to study psychopharmacology or the effect of drugs on the brain. And I did that. I did a fellowship at the National Institutes of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And that was pretty much set my career. I became an addiction psychiatrist and spent my career studying the effects of hormones on addiction, or rather the effects of addiction, particularly alcohol and cocaine use disorder, on the stress hormone response. And I did a lot of brain imaging studies looking at the intersection between brain changes and addiction. But where I am now is really a much different space. So I spent my career in academia at the medical school of South Carolina, and at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas. And I retired from Dallas 5.5 years ago now, in 2018. I've always been interested in drug policy reform. I've always had a passion for that area. And I couldn't be too active in it while I was working for the state of Texas and for the federal government at the VA. I had to keep somewhat of a low profile. But
that must have been pretty interesting, being a guy who, you got interested in this stuff and the effects of chemicals on the brain because of your own, psychedelic experiences that you had. And you obviously, this is where you're at now. So you obviously understood the benefits of it and the room for how it can, be so effective and helpful. But at the same time, you kind of had to, and I feel like a lot of people who work for certain, it might be either a corporation or they're working for the state, or they're working for the government. So they feel like they aren't, they're kind of hamstrung in what they can and cannot say. and you fell victim to that.
Well, I was hamstrung by what I could say, and so I no one ever clamped down on me as long as I kept my affiliation hidden. So, for instance, I couldn't go testify at the legislature and say that I was worked for the VA or that I worked for the University of Texas Southwestern. So I really had to keep that under wraps. And I was just aware that, I couldn't step out too much. And also, I was getting funded for 20 plus years from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And Nora Volkow, the director, has now really changed her tune over the years and has written about that we should be decriminalizing drugs. She did a wonderful interview at Drug Policy Alliance at the last reform meeting in Las Vegas in October. So that's been a sea change from where NIDA was when I was getting funded by them. And so I was always worried about my funding.
Of course.
So there were many things kind of keeping me quiet.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate, having the smartest people, the smartest people be, hamstrung by that, because it's like we could be advancing medicine like what we're seeing, right now, big time, at least in my community over here on the eastern side of this, up in Maine and Massachusetts, we're seeing outcomes, with people personally that are incredible, with psilocybin and of course with cannabis. Cannabis has been like the number one that we've seen over here that have been so effective. And I know that cannabis being a federally, illegal drug, it makes it tough for, it made it really tough for physicians who are in your place to even be able to advocate for this. So you might have had somebody come in who, was, a VA, and especially with vets being at the VA, cannabis long-term obviously isn't the best for sleeping, and it can have negative effects on sleep. But in the short term, getting, it takes away your dreams, right? It takes away your REM sleep a little bit. And I know that some veterans that I've talked to, they find that it's very, it's very helpful for them to sleep, and it's necessary for them to sleep. It's helped them with their PTSD. So that must have been such a challenging feeling, going to work and not being able to fully use, your expertise.
Day to day, there's so many hassles that you feel constricted by. That's just one of many. Working for any big organization, much less the federal government. But you're right, and there's other restrictions. I mean, thinking back, I had a family. I was a primary earner, and it was important that I had a regular paycheck coming in. So I remember when I first started speaking out about this, I had 37 years in the government at that point, and somebody complimented me for being courageous. And I said, the best thing that could happen to me right now is the federal government telling me I had to leave. I had a retirement set up. I had my 401k. Financially, I was okay. So there wasn't the risk. But even now, we have doctors who are afraid to speak out for cannabis legalization. And even with it being medically legal in 75% of the states, and in practically half the states, it's legal for adult use reasons. Even so, they're still afraid to speak out. And that's how Doctors for Cannabis Regulation started. You mentioned I'm president of Doctors for Drug Policy Reform, but we changed our name in last October from Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. It was started by David Nathan in 2016. And he was struck by how many of his peers would say to him, we really need to legalize it. This is ridiculous. But we're afraid to say anything. So he started Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. is a way, a place for physicians to speak out. And we still get people who join, who contribute financially and emotional support for our work, but request to remain anonymous.
It's so interesting because, like, on the eastern side of the United States, or at least in the Northeast, I shouldn't say the eastern side, but at least in the Northeast, you know, where I'm at, and at least especially in Massachusetts and in Maine, you know, I feel like every doctor is pretty much emboldened to be able to, every physician is able to say how they feel about cannabis. And if they think it's a good thing, a lot of them now are bringing it up. You know, they're not having to be, you know, a lot of times it used to have to be brought up by the patient. You know, maybe they had an interest in it and said, okay, well, you know, you can go here and there's medical places that you can get it by. And in certain treatments in certain disease states, it was, you know, maybe with cancer, there was more support on the hospital side or the treatment side of it. But it's so funny to me that there's still people who are, you know, privately, they support this 100%, but they aren't able to, you know, talk about it. Do you think that that's like, how does that make you feel? Do you think that that's a huge problem? Is that why you're doing what you're doing? You know, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel upset and impatient and, like you, surprised. Having moved from Texas 5 years ago to join my family in Colorado, it's such a sea change and you forget. So yeah, I walk around, literally it's a block to a dispensary and 2 blocks to another one in Colorado, which is really common in Denver. And yet when I go back to Texas, I mean, they have 1% THC for medical. We talk a lot in this country about the divide. And this is one thing where there's actually less a divide than in most things. I mean, both Republicans and Democrats, a majority believe we should be legalizing cannabis for adult use, much less for medical. But there still is a major divide in states where they don't have recreational or even medical. And it's much, much different there. And people are still afraid. And, you know, even where it is available, doctors, we can touch more on this, but doctors still don't know much about it. They're still not taught about it. Even though it's been legal since 1996, we've had medical cannabis in California. And even after almost 30 years now, we still have the endocannabinoid system kept almost as a secret in medical schools. It's insane.
Yeah, that is insane. So they're not even discussing this stuff at all in the medical schools, even to this day. You don't think in certain jurisdictions?
I would say in more than certain jurisdictions. From the last I read, it's 25% offer some curriculum. Now, this is the most populous neurotransmitter system in the nervous system or throughout the body. It's not just in the nervous system.
When you say the most popular, what do you mean the most?
More populous.
Most populous.
We have more cannabinoid receptors than any other receptors in the body. So they're all over the place. They affect all sorts of things. If it was anything other than cannabis related, we would have been learning about this 20 years ago. There's no reason for us not to be learning about it, except that it's controversial, I guess. I can't think of another reason for it. Even places where they do have curriculum, when I talk to residents about it, they say it's really been very minimal.
Yeah, that's what's wild to me is, like, you know, in my background, I feel like, you know, we would be able to, you know, we should be studying this every single day and there's so many more applications that we've just scratched the surface. You know, there's certain things, like, we understand that it can help with anxiety. We understand it can help with some depression. We can understand it can help with PTSD. We understand that it can help with appetite stimulation. But that's, like, literally just scratching the surface of what, of what this plant and what these chemicals can do. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is particularly preclinical studies, so non-human studies, there is a ton of research going on. And there's great excitement about it.
That now was that because of the war on drugs? Is that the reason why everyone has their opinion on that? Because is that why cannabis is so bad? Is because it was just the propaganda that was started that said this is so bad? Is that why people in Texas, there's still that faction of people who don't want to learn about it and don't want to legalize it? Is that why?
Yes, yeah. Definitely. They still, and it's, when you say people, it's a very small segment now. I mean, if you when you do a poll of Texans, they want medical legal, and I believe most people even want, I can't be sure about this, but I believe most people want adult use or recreational legal as well. So it's a small number of people. It's particularly like the lieutenant governor who's blocking it. So it just takes one or two well-positioned, typically conservative people, politicians in a state to block it. Even bills that have passed the legislature still get blocked.
Yeah, so it has everything to do with a few well-positioned people, because I would agree that the majority of Americans want cannabis to be just legal across the board. Would you say that that's the best way to go about it? Do you guys obviously have thought a lot about this. You guys are the Doctors for Drug Policy Reform, and is the way forward just to to deschedule this, or I know there's a lot in the works right now to reschedule cannabis. So is the best way forward just to deschedule?
So let me back up a sec. So it's not just so the federal government really doesn't legalize it. Like alcohol, they ended prohibition. What they do is they decriminalize it. And then it's up to the state as to how it's going to be regulated. Do you just not arrest people for it, or do you actually put in place regulation? And as physicians and other health professionals and scientists, the name of our organization was Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. That wasn't accidental. So it's not only important to stop arresting people for it, but to put a regulated system in place so that we know what we're getting and it's protected and you keep kids from getting it. And it has labels, etc. So we, almost everybody in our group believes that we should be descheduling cannabis. So rescheduling is kind of a good thing. I think it's the best thing about it is that it will make 280E go away. And 280E is a bill that was put in place many years ago to make it difficult to have a cartel, so that if you were involved in a Schedule 2 or 1 drug like cannabis, if your business was involved in that, you couldn't take a tax deduction. So right now, cannabis businesses can't take their tax deduction. If it became Schedule 3, that would help them take tax deductions like every other business does. And that's important. But other than that, most of us in our group do not believe Schedule 3 will make a particularly big difference. Cannabis itself is, even though it's Schedule 3, it's still, unless you have a prescription for it, and right now you can't buy that. There are no approved cannabis flower products or edibles. We have THC, we have Epidiolex or CBD. So there's a few of those that you can get prescriptions for, but cannabis itself would still not be a scheduled drug in the sense that it wouldn't be something that you could get a prescription for. So everything that you see in a dispensary would still not be legal from a federal perspective.
I know that most of us associate the weather getting chilly with flu and cold season, but here at Dr. BeeWell, we call it bad sugar season. As Americans, we generally eat like shit. During this time of year, with the holiday and other related stresses, those horrible eating practices tend to get kicked into overdrive. We offer a solution in the form of full-spectrum RSO infused raw local honey because we shouldn't be walking around eating nerd rope all day. Why not let the bees handle the heavy lifting that your sweet tooth demands? I think it's fair to say that most people know how vital strength training is for long-term health and fitness, but find it hard knowing where to start. I'm here to say that also included me, Dr. Steve. You want to make sure you're doing exercises correctly, you don't want to get hurt, and you have no idea how to structure a workout program to get the best results. I've been there. In fact, this is where I found myself a few months ago. That's where On Target Fitness comes in. At On Target, every client gets their own custom strength program, tons of individual attention in their unique small group format, and the common sense nutrition and health coaching necessary to make a lasting lifestyle upgrade. As a new member of On Target, I'm not only seeing major changes in my body, but also my overall quality of life. In the past, I've struggled with using proper form. Well, let me tell you, whether it's Coach Joe or Coach Ryan, they've got you covered with technique. Even movement patterns as simple as walking have improved since I've started. When I was working out by myself without a program, I was often lost and lacked the motivation to challenge myself. Not at On Target. The energy and support in the group dynamic is truly game-changing. I have so much fun every time I work out. If you're ready for lasting change, don't hesitate to schedule a complimentary strategy session at www.ontargetfit.com. During this session, you'll learn a lot, make a plan, and only move forward if it's right for your budget, schedule, and goals. I met with Coach Katie, and she was awesome. So please, if you need that giddy up back in your life, get on over to ontargetfit.com and schedule your session today. Do you think that that's something that we should be shooting for, is to be able to get cannabis as a prescription?
I think it's highly unlikely for a couple of reasons. One is it still wouldn't, that might help in a dispensary, but it wouldn't help for adult use. I don't want to have to go to a doctor to get a prescription to get high. But more than that, the FDA is not really set up to approve a flower. It is set up to approve simple molecules. So like THC or CBD, or penicillin, something like that. So these are isolated compounds that you can extract from a plant, you can synthesize them, but they're very specific, and you can define them from batch to batch. You're going to have exactly the same molecule. Even though they do have a botanical division at the FDA, they've only approved a very small number of plants, drugs, and even those, they're either extractions of simple molecules or they're synthetic. So they have not ever, to my knowledge, approved a plant that has, when we're talking about cannabis, we're talking about well over 100 cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids. So you have hundreds of compounds, and genetically speaking, even if you use the same exact genetic strain, differences in environment, temperature, humidity, all sorts of things are going to make small differences in the plant. So number one, it's going to be very difficult to get them to approve a single strain or chemovar of cannabis. Second, it costs like $1 billion to bring a compound from development into getting it on the market. How many cannabis strains are we going to have?
Right.
Not many.
Not many. Not many, if any. I think that. Sorry, keep going.
Just some. I don't think having Schedule 3 is going to be particularly helpful. Let me throw out this example with the FDA. right now, I was talking with Sue Sisley the other day, and I saw Rick Doblin talk about it a couple days ago. There was a grant offered by Michigan to study cannabis for suicide and veterans, $40 million. It was given to MAPS. Sue Sisley was involved in it. University of Michigan and Wayne State. And I believe all three of them are held up in conducting their studies with smoking cannabis, because this is almost 3 years now it's been held up, as if we don't desperately need studies of cannabis in veterans who are suicidal. I mean, my God. And it's been held up by the FDA because they're unsure if it's smoked cannabis or vape cannabis is safe enough for humans to use.
Why haven't they been able to figure this out, or why haven't they been able to discern on that?
I can't tell you that, but that is my concern with rescheduling and leaving it just in the hands of the FDA.
Yeah, so that you think that or I shouldn't say you think, I should ask rather, so it would be better if the federal government deschedules and then they leave it up to the states, and then the states are the ones who are regulating each the cannabis in each of their states, and that's how it should go?
Well, kind of, yes, but the federal government still needs some oversight. And there really isn't a good way to do it presently. I mean, this is talked a lot about in the space about how should we do this. And I think it's going to take a new approach. I mean, we have substances that are legal to use. Alcohol is probably the best example of one that is kind of regulated. We regulate where they can be sold by state, but the federal government has a place where it's overseen and there's oversight. Except alcohol is not a medicine. So cannabis is very unique in that it both is used recreationally and it is used medically. And so it's going to take, I think, a new approach to figure out where to put it. The concern with rescheduling is that once that happens, is the push to get it descheduled, is the push to make it more accessible and keep the problems that I was talking about from happening. Is it going to stop? Is the government, federal government, and is Biden going to say, okay, we got it rescheduled, we're done now? Or do we take a little bit now and hope for more later? So the concern about getting rescheduled is not that it's worse. It's not that it's not some improvement. It's more that, will it stop this train from moving?
Yeah, I completely hear that, because you're saying that one of the only benefits, and like I said, it would I run a cannabis business, and I understand I understand 280E and how that negatively affects my business, and how that negatively affects it obviously negative affects people getting cannabis because it's harder for these companies to grow, so it's definitely decreasing access. So I think that is about the only thing that it would. I'm not sure what would happen to the people who are currently serving in in institutions and jails if it went from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Would anything change for them? Do you know?
No, I don't think so. I think that is going to take expungement.
Expungement, yeah, because it's back, right? So that's the whole thing. It's so the only thing it's really changing is 280E. So in my opinion, obviously that would be great for the businesses, but it would probably, the businesses would then get, right now, a lot of the people who are being loud about this are the businesses, are the corporations who are saying, because one, they want their bottom line to be affected, and they obviously too want to be able to advance research so that cannabis can be more safely accepted in the in the ether, in the world. in society. So like if they did reschedule, I agree that there probably would be a less of a push. You know, the Biden administration would say, hey, this is a win, and maybe that people wouldn't keep pushing for deschedule and to get this to to be something that's not regulated at the same level that it's regulated at now. I guess there would be like in the going forward, you wouldn't be able to. It would now be a Schedule 3 drug, so the charges might be a little bit different. You know, if you would have possession of a Schedule 3 narcotic opposed to a Schedule 1, that might be a little bit better. But I don't. Overall, I hear what you're saying. Like, yeah, maybe we should take a little bit now, and it's a really tough decision, right? It's a really tough decision because it's like, okay, if we don't go in this thing and say, oh no, we can't, just not going to reschedule. Let's not reschedule. Let's go towards deschedule, and that's the only thing we care about. Maybe you are, inhibiting some growth or some progress to take place.
Yeah, exactly. And so we are going to. I wouldn't say we oppose, by we I mean Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. We won't oppose rescheduling. There are some benefits, but what we would like to see is descheduling. And since you brought up about people incarcerated or that have it on the record, and so it can be interfering with jobs and housing and all sorts of things, scholarships for student loans. That Last Prisoner Project, LPP, is this is being headed up by Jason Ortiz, is going to have a 420 vigil, both a lobby day and vigil in Washington. It's actually, I believe, going to be on 418, but they're calling it 420 for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And this is going to be working to deschedule cannabis because it's seen as the best way to keep people from getting arrested and out of jail. But obviously, the Last Prisoner Project is there to get people out of jail for cannabis and hopefully all drugs.
Yeah, that would be great, and that's it's just it's wild to me that like in my state, and I can operate a business that sells cannabis, and I know a lot of people who smoke cannabis and engaging in this daily and are selling it and selling it legally. I'm doing quotes, legally, but they are, there's other people who are serving like lifetime, not lifetime, but 20, 30-year sentences for this type of stuff, and it's like, man, like. I get that there probably was some violence and stuff that was going on with that, back in the day, just because of how it was regulated. It was being self-regulated by these people, and they had to protect their assets, and that created violence and stuff like that. But like, cannabis is such if this was all created, by the war on drugs. If cannabis had just become, it had just been a plant that people were able to use, and they were able, I guess let me ask you that. What would have, if the war on drugs didn't happen, you were alive during the 70s and stuff, and then the war on drugs kind of made cannabis, the Controlled Substance Act came after that. And so what would you think would have, what would the world be today if the war on drugs didn't happen?
That's a really interesting question. It'd be completely different, wouldn't it? I mean, the whole police state that we experience with the SWAT teams, with our police becoming militarized, the effect it's had, the profound effect it's had on Black and brown people, all that would be different. I assume we'd find some other way to keep people
disenfranchised,
but all that would have been different. And I like to think that if we had, if we just regulated drugs and had safe supply and kept people, just worked to keep people alive and gave them access to treatment, we wouldn't have 100,000 overdose deaths a year from fentanyl and other drugs. People would know what they're getting. We wouldn't have more people incarcerated than certainly any other democratic country in the world. There's so many things that we wouldn't have a prison industrial system. So there's so many things that I think would be different about the world. We wouldn't have pushed the rest of the world into a system where it was designed to interdict drugs all the time. I was at the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna last year, and I was not expecting this, but I expected it to be very conservative and reactionary. But the chair of the commission started out the plenary session at the UN saying we have spent trillions of dollars on the drug war. We've incarcerated hundreds of thousands or millions of people. We've ruined, millions of lives. And yet every year we interdict more and more drugs. So clearly we're doing something wrong. It was just, my head exploded. I had not expected to essentially them throw in the towel and say, this isn't working. And now we're stuck with these treaties, and it's very, very hard to undo it.
I've read some of the stuff that you've done, and you have said that it's basically because the United States had such draconian laws regarding regarding drugs, we have because like we do with everything else, we influenced these other countries to have these same draconian laws, and now we have people like you and people like me who are being progressive and trying to show that that's not the way, and we've come quite, even in my lifetime, just in my lifetime alone, cannabis went from being federally illegal, medically adult use, no matter what, it was just completely illegal, to now being, operated in, like you said, about 75% of states are at least medically legal. So to see that jump, is significant. But it's the United States is the lead actor, right? Like we're the ones who have caused a lot of this.
Definitely. Oh yeah. And certainly in back then we had a far more powerful influence on the whole world. I think everybody kind of, we made it financially and politically very difficult for other countries to refuse us. And now they do. I mean, now other countries, the UN goes and says, well, you can't legalize cannabis, like they did in Uruguay quite some time ago now. And they say, yeah, okay, try to stop us. I mean, and we don't do anything about it because there's little we can do. So, but yeah, we really, really push the whole world to take on these treaties, and now we're left with it and realizing I think in large part we do realize that we've made a terrible mistake and it didn't help, yet we're still stuck with it. I mean, in Oregon with 110, they've had it 3 years. There are problems, but there's problems in every state. It has not increased to overdoses relative to other states. They haven't had enough time to really make a dramatic difference, and they're not offering safe supply, but they did decriminalize all drugs, and yet some people in the state are trying to overturn it. So even these somewhat, I mean, that's more than an incremental change. It's a significant change, but there's people in Oregon trying to change it back, saying, well, we haven't, it didn't cure everything. We've had 100 years of prohibition. You have 3 years of decriminalization, and you're saying, oh, well, you've had plenty of time to make a difference. No, give it 100 years before you say, oh, it's not working.
I love that perspective because, like, I have a lot of friends who, and I think maybe it has to do with how they politically lean. But like when I talk about, my stuff, and I talk about how, decriminalization is great and how it's happening here, and, decriminalization of all drugs would likely be the best route. They point to Oregon and they say, dude, look what's happening in Oregon. They're already trying to change it because it's such a shit show over there. And like I like boots on the ground. I don't really know what's happening over there because I'm over on this side of the state. And I can just see what I'm reading, and like it depends on what source you're reading from, but it seems like they're definitely like saying that has been a big failure.
Yeah, they do say that, but one would expect them to, huh?
Of course, and that's the thing. And I think what you said too, like we're not offering safe supply yet. We're not offering, are there harm reduction models there that like they're, where they have facilities and they're offering treatment? Does that exist there?
Yes, I think they have given a lot more money to treatment, but I think it takes time to get these treatment centers going.
More than 3 years.
Pardon?
I said more than 3 years, right?
Yeah. And as far as I know, they do not have overdose prevention centers. They don't have safe supply. There's a number of other things that I think would be helpful. But yeah, they just haven't had much time. And whether it's worse than it would have been, as I said, it's not like their overdose rates are worse than other states. And you can point to a lot of states there's a TikTok I watch, Urban Visuals. And it goes from state to state, city to city, showing just all these homeless, unhoused people who are living in tents and just clearly drugged out of their minds. And it's really frightening to see people living like this. And Portland is one of the places, but there's other places. Well, Portland's not even in Oregon.
Yeah, Portland, Oregon is definitely one of the places. Yeah. Portland, Maine is also one of them.
Yeah. San Francisco, there's a lot of states. I mean, we've had here in Denver, we've certainly had our problem with it. I've heard one of my colleagues at a talk, he actually said he made a connection between cannabis legalizations and all the mass shootings. And I went up to him later and I says, you're a respected psychiatrist. People look up to you. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's funny because like I just doing some research for this show and stuff. I'm just typing in certain things in Google just to find out more about what your organization does. And one of the things that I came across was that, how there, like a few articles about how it's, just negative articles about how cannabis is inducing psychosis and all this. And I read the articles, and there's no clinically backed research. There's no, there's no good research that's done on this. It's just it's almost like an opinion piece. And it's like, wow, how are we, why are we saying this stuff? Why are we negatively putting this stuff even out there if it's, it's likely not true?
Because people like to want to continue the drug war. They think that it's the other thing. They think that I want to come back to the cannabis and psychosis, but they think that by penalizing people for using drugs, it will stop drug use, and it doesn't. And we have learned that repeatedly. Again, by putting hundreds of thousands, millions of people in prison and ruining their lives, it hasn't changed anything. So this is not, if it did, well, okay, maybe we should be looking at this. I still don't think it's a very humane way. And in this position, if they can't stop using, they have an addiction, and we don't treat other addictions like nicotine or alcohol like this. We don't treat any other diseases like this. If somebody's has heart disease and he's eating too many cheeseburgers, or diabetes and eating too much candy, these have profound damage on society in terms of economic costs, in terms of cost of the family. We don't put people in jail for it. So just on the surface, this is a health problem, and the medical profession has been very, very slow, if not resistant, to jumping on the idea and acknowledging the idea that we have isolated one medical problem, addiction, drug addiction, not other addictions like nicotine, or
Food.
alcohol, but just certain kind of drug addiction, it's okay to call this, to say that this requires incarceration, or this requires probation or drug courts or whatever.
Yeah, imagine that, Bryon. Imagine if, the person who's like, is 300 pounds because they have a food addiction and they eat too much cheese, they're eating too much cheeseburgers, and instead of, when they show up to the hospital, to get it because they've had an MI, they've had a heart attack. We, instead of saying, hey, we're going to treat you, we're going to just put you in jail, deal with your heart attack. If you live, sure, that's great, but then we're going to throw you in prison for the next, 10 years because of your addiction. And that's exactly what it is, right?
Yes. Yes. There's lots of chronic illnesses out there that are due to lifestyle and choices people make. And we've decided in general that this is their choice to make. And we do what we can to help treat people. Look at what we did for tobacco. From a public health perspective, we use taxes and, I guess, shame, and making it more difficult, and a lot of education and preventative education. We used to have about half the people smoked. It's gone down to probably less than 20% kids. It's gone down to about a third, to something like 4% of kids smoke tobacco now. I mean, it's been tremendous change just using a public health approach and not a punitive approach.
Yeah, education over everything. Like when we penalize these people, it doesn't teach anyone anything besides that, one person thinks what this person specifically thinks it's bad. This group of people, and right now what we know, what we've talked about earlier, is this is a very small group of people who think it's bad. Even to your point, like the person at the UN, somebody who is, that this is their policy. It's a lot more draconian over there. And on the global level, they are even admitting, hey, this isn't working. This isn't working at all. And we need to look at other solutions on how to make this better. I think that must have been like a super, interesting experience going, being at the UN and doing that. And, what was the outcome? Like, because that was the first thing he said, right? You said that was kind of how he opened, but like, what was the outcome? Were they open to change?
It's the UN is a very difficult thing to change. Once you have a treaty in place, it's very slow moving, and even this kind of acknowledgement took years of civil society, the nonprofit organizations that have been actively going to this meeting for a couple decades, and putting in a lot of work. So even getting this admission and acknowledgement and these kind of discussions is a really big deal. I think I can't really speak to how much change there is. I think I was struck that it was even being discussed. And, there's a lot of countries out there that, Russia, and other countries that China, are not in favor. We think about, I remember I was giving a talk when I went there, and it was on cannabis. And I was thinking, well, cannabis is legal now, at least medically, in much of the country, in much of the world. And I looked in, I saw, United States, Canada, a lot of South America, it's legal medically, Europe. That accounted, the United States and the Americas account for about 20% of the world's population. I thought it was way more than that, but it is not. Asia, I mean, there's just a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. You don't think that way. I agree.
And so moving, and as I said, the United States has less influence, as we see daily, than it used to. So moving this slow moving ship of the UN is very difficult.
Yeah, and if if the UN did, because they have so much, they have so much power over policy of, you know, what each individual nation is going to do, right? Like because if the UN made the shift, it still doesn't mean that Russia or China is gonna get on board, right?
That's true. And if Russia and China aren't on board, it's unlikely that the UN is going to be able to make the shift.
Right. And that's, you know, that's so, it's so funny that we think about that, because we think about it here, but how progressive it is, but you really put it into perspective when you talk about how that's only 20%, you know, only 20% of the population, you know, and maybe only 10% of that population has access to, you know, to cannabis as medicine.
That's true. Even countries where it is legal as a medicine, it doesn't necessarily mean people have access or there's doctors out there prescribing it.
Mm.
And even in Europe, you know, most of certainly there's very little access to legal cannabis.
Yeah, definitely. We have a person from, you know, from Ireland who helps us with our show, and sometimes when she watches it, you know, she's like, you know, she's going through it, she's doing some edits and stuff, and she just thinks it's wild. It's wild what we're even talking about, because it's just not the way over there. It's just cannabis is illegal. It's just how, you know, it's not being given to people. If anything, it's still, you know, people are having, you know, the drug dealers, you know, that's who are people who are smoking weed or getting it from their drug dealer.
Yep.
So it's so wild how you know how different it is, and just how we need to keep impacting change, and hopefully, you know, other places. I know that, like, it's so funny, like, because when you think of Europe, like, most people will think of like Amsterdam, right, in the Netherlands, and they think like, oh, this is a place where cannabis is free, but it's like, no, even there, it's like, you know, regulated to a very certain degree, and it's regulated in a certain way, and you know, it's hard. You said you can get cannabis anywhere you go. You know, if you ask somebody where you go, they're going to help you get it illegally or whatever. There's that type of access, but there's not. You know, here there's in certain states there's dispensaries on every corner. Like you said, there's dispensaries everywhere, and I believe that should definitely be the way it is, because then you're having a safe supply. You know, I with cannabis, I do think that there's a lot. You know, like, you know, we just had a gentleman on the show who does testing. You know, he owns a testing lab, and you know, there's just a lot that can go wrong. You know, people should know, you know, what cannabinoids are actually in their product. People should definitely know that, and then they should know that it's free of pesticides, it's free of heavy metals, you know, it's free of any mold, it's free of you know, any contaminants. Like, they should know that. Like, that's what we do with alcohol. There's, you know, we know that the alcohol that we're getting is safe. So it's just like it's so wild to think that we're still so far away from like, even though it feels like we're so progressed and we're such in a thing, but there's really so much more work to do.
Definitely. And talk about difficulty moving large organizations. Germany is, from what I understand, is very close to regulating cannabis, but there's going to be no commercial industry. It's going to be through like co-ops, I think, or maybe pharmacies for medical, which it probably already is for medical. But it's not going to be commercial, and you know, you can argue whether that's good or bad, but it's primarily, from what I read, due to the European Union, would have to sign on, because for them to have commercial cannabis, it would, on their own, it would go against their agreements with the European Union. So without moving the European Union in this direction, they have to limit their legalization just to kind of government access.
So when you say that, like, government access, there's going to be no commercialization of it? So there's no private companies that are able to do it? Is that what you mean?
That's my understanding, yes.
Wow, so it's going to be all government run. It'll be completely run by the government, or will they stop, like, decriminalizing if people were doing it, you know, on their own? But that's not commercialization, but that's still doing it privately.
Well, and I think there'll be co-ops, as there are in Spain, which is that groups can get together and grow their own. So it's
not for sale.
It's only for use within the co-op.
That's pretty cool. Like, hey, you have this, capability. You're a good grower. You're a good. You have this ability to give us, healthy stuff that goes into the plant. Like nutrients and stuff. So then maybe you're a part of the co-op and you just get access to it. I wonder, do you have any understanding of how it is in Spain? Is that how it is? People just grow together and then they share it all, or there's probably got to be some type of market that's developed from that, like, an illegal market.
Yes. My understanding is that there's some unsavory characters, just from what I read. I don't know. Unsavory characters that have entered into this and have taken over many of the co-ops. So there could be some downsides here when you don't have it commercialized like we do here in the States.
Yeah, and exactly, and that's the downsides of it. It's like, we want to not over-regulate it to the point where we're not, where we're not giving people access to it, but we want to regulate it to the point of where it's safe.
Yep. Yeah. It's always, there's always that balance of anything we regulate, to regulate it so that it's safe without making it too cumbersome to make it profitable.
Yeah, that's what the job of government is, right? That's what they're there for, and that's what they should be doing. And they figured it out with other things. And even though cannabis is a little bit more nuanced, and other drugs are a little bit more nuanced, like, we should be able to do this, and we have all the money in the world. Like, we can do whatever we want if the right people decide that that's what we want to do. If they created a bill, they could say, okay, we can put $5 billion towards drug rehabilitation and drug reform. They're not doing that, but it would be great if we did do that, like, hey, each state's going to get this much, it's going to be is going to get this amount of money to create new treatment centers, going to be able to create harm reduction models in their own states, going to be able to teach people, just education, like you said, with the nicotine, with the tobacco, like, just educating people like crazy. Like, this is what is going to happen. It's not necessarily in like a bad, we're not negatively educating them or telling them that it's bad, but like, hey, these are what will happen. This is what you need to be aware of. You had mentioned that you wanted to touch on cannabis and psychosis. I am curious about what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I wanted to come back because you said it's someone just, kind of making it up. But there is, and cannabis does induce psychosis. The question, I think the big question that we've been dealing with is, does it cause schizophrenia? So does it cause long-term psychosis, over years or decades, even after you stop using it? We do know that, and I want to say David Nathan, the founder of Doctors for Cannabis Regulation and the first president, him and Peter Grinspoon, who's very well known in the cannabis space, they wrote a nice op-ed for CNN that talked about the literature in both directions. And their sense is that, well, let me say, it does cause psychosis. For people that have used high-potency cannabis, it induces, I wouldn't say a psychotic state necessarily. It can make you very high, and for people that might be vulnerable or unfamiliar with cannabis, it can make them psychotic so that they lose touch with reality. Again, the concern is what happens if it goes on for a long time. There's certain people, particularly those with family history or personal history of things like bipolar disorder or particularly schizophrenia, that may have persistent problems when they use cannabis. And it remains unclear to my read of the literature whether this is actually due to the cannabis, or are they using cannabis because they're already feeling a bit unsteady, uncertain with the reality, anxious, depressed, and so they use it to treat it? Or is there's evidence that their genetics both lead them to psychosis and it leads them to use cannabis? So it's to me, the literature remains unclear. one of the points, and it's a really good point that David and Peter made, was that, well, if with so many people using cannabis at this point, you would think that compared to 60, 70 years ago, we would have an increased likelihood of people showing up with schizophrenia. And that hasn't seemed to happen. But there's other studies out there that are concerning, that do suggest that people that are smoking a lot of cannabis do land up, perhaps more so with high potency cannabis, do land up with persistent psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. So to me, it's not clear. Now, one thing, this is often used when talking about the harms of cannabis. This is used often as an argument for, well, then it should be illegal. Well, no, that doesn't help. What helps is teaching people about the potential harms and being able to step in and figure out what to do if people do experience these harms. But there's many harmful things that we do not criminalize. Most things we do, driving a car is potentially harmful. It kills, in this country alone, tens of thousands of people a year. We don't make it a criminal. We regulate it. You have to get a driver's license. I mean, there's different things we do. We have stoplights. We try to make it safer. So how can we make it safer? It's not so discussing these potentially bad outcomes from cannabis is not, in my mind, a question of, should this make it legal or illegal?
Yeah, alcohol is the big one with that, right? Like alcohol, we know that it causes alcoholism, and that's a thing, but we're not saying that it needs to be illegal. We just educate people like, hey, if you have a family history of alcoholism, this is something that you need to be careful of. It's something that you need to watch out for, because it's absolutely something that can happen to you. So you just need to be aware of it. So somebody whose family might have, like I said, I think we need to still find out some of that stuff. And what I meant more too when I said like it made up is I mean like it was just coming from case studies. I was just seeing like certain case studies that would then draw it on to say this is fact because we've seen it happen in one person. And it's like, well, what's going on with this person? They obviously have a larger family history of what's happening. So like just educating people is always the way through, I think, and just letting them know like, hey, this is what this product can do. This is what this plant can do to you, especially if you have these family histories. That's something that's really interesting to me too, is like we, back in the day, just in terms of the data about people not seeing, like we're not seeing more outcomes of schizophrenia now, and we likely would because cannabis is more accessible to everybody. These high THC strains, like these are all new. Like this is almost like an entirely new product, from my understanding at least, because like back in the day we weren't cultivating these plants to have to express a 35 or a 40% THC percentage. It was just kind of like everything was right around 12, 13, 15%, and that's about as high as you were going to get. Do you see that? Do you see that being like a thing that we need to? Do you think that's something that will be regulated? Like like you can't have above this certain percentage of THC, or because they are so different. It is like when you think about like the commercialization of it and how it fits and how the market will continue to grow. It's like it's really challenging because there's you can have some people's endocannabinoid systems in the way that they see it. They want to have a 15 to 16% THC, but then some people really do want that 35% THC, percentage. So it varies. And I just wonder if like what the best way forward is with that, or if you have an opinion on it at all.
Yeah. And it's not the 35% that worries me as much as the, shatter, that's 90%. I mean, that's intense stuff.
Yeah.
And we have had it in the form of hash for millennia, but not as ubiquitous, not as easy to get. It does concern me. And the more potent, the more concentrated a drug is, the more you take, the stronger effect it's going to have. And it could have a qualitatively different effect. What to do about it, I don't know. One problem with there's two problems with setting a threshold. How do you determine the threshold? Is it percent? Is it by weight? Where do you set it? And we don't have the data to say, well, 30% is okay, but 35 is not, or 40. And then you also get into the question of an illegal market. If somebody wants, as you say, they say, I do better with 70 than I do with 40, they're going to be able to get the 70, except it's not going to be in a dispensary. So do we want to push people into an illegal market? And I haven't come down on, so you're always weighing these different things where there's, as usual, there's not a simple, straightforward answer to most questions.
Yeah, in this one, there's so many nuances, and like every single question I ask you, I feel like there's so many different answers that we could have, and they're not always able to, because there's so many different points. Like you said, I'm just thinking about psilocybin specifically, and how we're going now. We're trying to get all these these decrim models to happen, and it is happening in Massachusetts for instance, where they have different jurisdictions have this organization, Base Staters for Natural Medicine. They have advocated to these different local groups, and in about 8 or 9 jurisdictions, they've gotten to completely decriminalize it, and they decriminalize psilocybin. So they're not that's the model right now. But I know when I talk to some people of this group, they tell me how I'm asking them what's the future? What do you guys want? What bills do you support? And they do openly support certain bills, but there's certain stuff that's happening, in Colorado and in Oregon with psilocybin, where the model over there is more of a medical model, and then these people over here, they want it to be where people, a new age shaman, if you will, is able to share it with their community and share it amongst friends. They're able to grow on their own. They're able to grow these mushrooms on their own. And the point I'm making is there's so many different, there's so many different, thought patterns out there of how people want to approach it. And you really have to be nuanced, and you really have to know what you're talking about. Because even me, sometimes I look at some of these bills and I support them. I say, oh, this looks great. This is going to give people more access to mushrooms and more access to psilocybin and, maybe some of these other psychedelics. But then I find out that it would inhibit, people from home growing and from people what a lot of people are already doing now, sharing it with each other, growing it on their own. I believe there needs to be some regulation for it. I'm curious because you guys do have, some stuff going on over there about, with psilocybin. What do you think of the whole way that this model has been, been rolled out?
Well, it's a fascinating question. Kevin Matthews was the guy who really got it going in Denver. That's where I live now. And the vote was not long after I moved here to decriminalize psilocybin. Or make it, they couldn't decriminalize it. It was making it lowest thing that police ought to be worried about.
I think that's what they're calling the lowest priority. That's what they're saying decriminalize is.
Yeah, but that's different. And I'll come to that in a sec. And I asked him how he had the chutzpah, how he had the gall to think that he could ever get this passed. And it did pass. And Colorado has since, Colorado is not only starting up the natural medicine clinic, but they did decriminalize psilocybin, DMT, ibogaine, and mescaline, the extract from peyote. And I was at a lecture. There's a great group here that puts on monthly lectures in various cities, NOWAC. And shortly after it was decriminalized, and somebody passed around a chocolate bar that just, I forget the name of the chocolate bar. And on the back, in very, very tiny letters, it said psilocybin, and said, I don't know if it had I think it had a dosage per piece. But I thought, oh my God, what could go wrong here, you know? I mean, it took me some work to find that it said psilocybin on it. And NOAC, for subsequent talks, they say this should not be a place where you source psilocybin. So that was an example of, you know, what could go wrong. But in general, I've heard very little. I have at least heard very little in terms of emergency room visits, things like that, because of it. Ibogaine in particular worries me because it can be cardiotoxic. People can die from using it. But it's unusual. But still, I had thought that we would see more problems. And as far as I know, it hasn't been happening.
Yeah, it's so funny, Bryon, that those chocolate bars you're talking about, they're everywhere. They're like everywhere amongst the community. You know, that's the way that most people, I would say, are consuming psilocybin right now, is in a chocolate bar. They're having somebody locally is making them, and, you know, they're putting they're coming up with some brand that's of whatever the brand that they're using. And then, yeah, I'd say, and then on the back, it might say, you know, contains 3.5 grams of psilocybin, you know, 0.1 to 0.3, grams per, per piece and stuff like that. So it makes me like, you know, if you have a trusted source, that's great. But like, how many people have a trusted source are actually going to be able to do the work to get the trusted source like that? It does make me very nervous. It does make me, I am glad that more people are sharing psilocybin with each other, if that's what's happening. And there's no nefarious, you know, people aren't putting other chemicals in the chocolate or whatever, and it's not as, you know, not a nefarious thing. But likely there's always going to be some bad actors. And so, like, it's funny you say that, because that's how everybody is consuming psilocybin right now, is in these chocolate bars.
Wow. And we do have private physicians. I went to a sacred ceremony, kind of like ayahuasca ceremony. I haven't done ayahuasca, but what I understand is like an ayahuasca ceremony, but with psilocybin, with a physician and a number of guides. And there were 15 of us in the physician's home. And she has psilocybin that's sourced. And she had 3 different strains, and so we choose which one we want. And it was very cool. But also she charges for providing a safe space and the space and the guidance. But she cannot, of course, charge or sell the psilocybin itself. So this is outside. So they haven't started the natural medicine clinics yet. The rules haven't come down yet. I think they're supposed to come out very shortly, within a month or two, and for public comment. But I know other private physicians that are doing this as well.
That's really unique and really awesome to hear that physicians are doing this, because I know of a lot of people who are, you know, like I said, new age shamans who are doing this, and they're just doing it because they're in a jurisdiction where it might be decriminalized, or they're, like I was talking about, and so, or they're not, and they're just doing this. They're providing the space for people, but that's really interesting, because that's how it happened with cannabis too, right? At first was the people they couldn't sell the cannabis to somebody, but they could sell them, you know, a T-shirt, or sell them to meet up. We can, this is a half-hour meeting that we're going to meet up, and you're going to pay me $100 for it, but I'm going to also give you and gift you some cannabis. That was kind of like the way around it. And I'm actually like really glad that's happening. That somebody is she's giving people those experiences, and I likely, if it's happening on the physician level, it's also happening on like the shaman level, like what I was referring to. But the rules haven't come down, and I hope Colorado learns from Oregon, because like these centers are open in Oregon, right? They're and people are being charged quite a bit of money. From my understanding, like it's a gram of mushrooms, is going to cost somebody like $3,500 to get to get a treatment. I think. What do you think about that?
I heard that exact number as well. And that's outrageous. I mean, who can afford that?
Right.
Especially if you want more than one treatment, but even one treatment, that's hopefully, I know Colorado, the committee here is definitely looking at what's going on in Oregon. Another issue is that in Oregon, you have to have a freestanding building that's just used for this. So if you have, I know, a social worker in town here who is doing these kind of treatments, and she has 20 offices in her practice. It's a very big practice. They use it for all sorts of things, see all sorts of people and kids, and she's doing some treatments there. But in Oregon, you wouldn't be allowed because it's not just used for psychedelic treatment or psilocybin treatment.
Yeah.
It's not really feasible.
Yeah, the single building thing, that was put in place by people who wanted, to control the system because they had the money to be able to buy those places. That seems like a system of control.
Well, that makes sense.
Like to make, instead of having this woman has 20 practices, she's a licensed clinical social worker. She's doing the good work already. She has been doing it. Like, who are we to tell her, hey, you need to stop doing this because you're doing other things in your place?
Yes, or to buy another building.
Yeah, go buy another building where you just have to specifically do this and not bring people who might be even comfortable coming to this space already.
Yeah. Another weird thing, well, to me it was weird. I was going to say I kind of understand it, but I don't think I do actually. So if you're a psychiatrist working with someone as a guide, so the Oregon requires that you have a psychedelic guide with you. And a psychedelic guide training, like for MAPS, is very specific in what you can say and not say. And so you can guide people along, but you can't do interventions that are beyond your skill level. Well, if you're a psychiatrist serving as a guide and somebody becomes psychotic, you can only use, by law, the Oregon law, you can only use the training you received as a psychedelic guide. You can't use, or psychedelic therapist, you can't use the training you have as a psychiatrist. And that's kind of weird.
It's backwards. I feel like, why wouldn't you use this? That's why we want people to be using all their experience and all their education to create the most comfortable environment and the most safe environment. In this case, if somebody is going, in psychosis or whatever, and does that happen to have? I mean, I know people are in an altered state, but is it a state of? That is what psychosis is, I suppose, right? Like you're detached from reality.
Yeah, people can become detached, sure, and yeah, you have to bring people back. I saw it happen at the sacred ceremony I attended, where actually it was a friend of mine who they had to take her to a different room and really work with her. Who are you? Where are you? What's your name? And I only know they told me about this because I wasn't allowed. That they had a place where they could work with her, and it doesn't happen often, but they need to be prepared to deal with that.
And they should be able to use their training that they have. That is a wild law, or wild rule. I definitely don't agree with that one either.
Yeah, and I'm not. Yeah, I can't really figure out where that came from. What their concern was about that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. I'd like that. Maybe my opinion could be swayed. I'd have to really hear what the person was saying on the other side of it for sure.
Yeah.
Now, how was this this sacred ceremony? How was that for you? What did you think? Was it a positive experience, or I'm very curious.
The audience can't see me looking pensive. It was, I've waited my whole life for that trip. It was awesome. It was so cool. I was worried about, number one, doing it in a closed space. I mean, we did have access to outside, but we were isolated to our mattress. We were instructed not to get off our mattress. That was our space. If we need to go to the bathroom, we raise our hand and we're guided, partly because there's so many mattresses, they don't want us falling on people because you get a little unsteady. If we need water, they'll bring water. And it was so nice to not have to worry about anything. I put on my shades and just lay there, and I had to figure out whether I wanted to put my blanket on or off to regulate my temperature. But that was the only decision I had to make. So it was a very safe space. I was very prepared for it, and what I'd been learning and hearing in my previous experiences. And so it was very rewarding, and I was ready to just take. I had really no intention other than just to let the plant do what it was going to do, and it did its thing and took me to very interesting places. There was an indigenous woman there who had just lost her son, and she began sobbing really, really terribly, and I just could emotionally enter her space and feel not only her grief, but the grief of her people, going back generations, centuries, the humiliation, the loss of land. I wouldn't have been able to share in that. And I talked to her later because I feel a little guilty. Is this cultural appropriation? I mean, I don't feel I was intruding her space, and she felt fine with it, and she was there. I would not have had that experience if I was in the woods with some friends or just doing it with a therapist one-on-one. So it really allowed me to access information and experience and the oneness with others, the connection that I wouldn't have been able to have in another situation, or I haven't had in another situation anyways.
It's thank you for sharing that with me. It's so profound, isn't it? That's what led me to this, to being able to openly talk about this stuff. And I had, like I said, I had my issues. I struggled with, with certain addiction issues, and I thought, hey man, I can never, the abstinence only model is the only thing that exists for me, and that's what I can only do. And then when I started to, trust myself with cannabis, a little more and realize that this could be an effective tool to help me in my life and to be a therapy and a treatment for me. And then that was the beginning of, okay, that if I can feel comfortable with this, maybe there's some of these other these plant compounds that would do the same thing. And Bryon, I had the same exact experience. It's just my openness, my ability to have different perspective. I think that's really what it is. I can be so stuck on one thing or think of something one certain way, and then when I have a session and a treatment for myself, I that goes away. That completely goes away, and I can completely understand what another person might have been saying to me, what their point of view might have been, why they were saying it. It really just opens you up to these experiences, and having that cultivated for you, I think is amazing. I'm really happy that this physician woman is doing this and leading these groups and having these people together. I think that there's a gentleman up here who's doing it with men specifically, and he's getting 8 or 10 men together, and they're going on these journeys together. And I think that there's benefit to going on the journey individually. I do think that there is, like you said, you wouldn't have had that same experience if you were doing it with the therapist or you were on your own. And I do agree it would have, but I don't think that experience would have been, non-beneficial. I think that there would have been, benefits to that type of experience as well. But doing it in a group setting and where you can feel what people's energy and do, it's always been of community. This is what we've been doing this for a long, long time. These indigenous cultures, like you said, are, people that we come from, that we've been doing this stuff already for thousands and, for millennia basically. So was this your only experience with ceremony?
Yes. It's been my only one. I'm doing it again in a couple of weeks. Talking about it is still kind of weird for me. Going back to our discussions at the beginning about the restrictions I had previously when I was in full-time academia, and I would not have talked about this years ago at
Right.
all, and now I can. And there's also a change within even the academic community. Lived experience is becoming increasingly important, but and often in the addiction academic community, lived experience means having an experience with addiction. But really, to me, lived experience is having any experience with psychoactive drugs, which is almost everybody. I mean, I've been sitting here sipping coffee while we've been talking. That's a psychoactive substance. Most people have had at least some experience with alcohol. So we've all had, most everyone, unless probably for religious reasons, they have never done any psychoactive substance, have some lived experience. But we don't typically talk about our lived experience with drugs, even cannabis.
We really don't. And it's so funny. It goes back to like this, the war on drugs, the negative propaganda around it. Like, it would be great if you could go to work and talk about this stuff with people, but there's so many places where people are having these mushroom ceremonies, and they're having, or they're using cannabis as a treatment, and then they're going to work on Monday and they can't even talk about it with their colleagues. It's just not acceptable. It's not okay to talk about. It's so taboo.
Right. I did also want to talk about for a minute, we have to stop soon, but as a neuroscientist, I mentioned at the beginning that I did work in brain imaging for most of my career. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to work with psychedelics. That, wasn't a thing until recently that people started doing that. Wonderful work. And I thought of it when you were talking about your ability to see things in a new way. And I don't know how much the general populace or your listeners out there are aware of this work that shows what is really happening is that the brain is cut up into networks. So there's a network for visual and auditory and ego, called that latter is the default mode network. Attention, stress, etc. And even though these parts of the brain are in different parts of the brain, they're hardwired to react in a similar way. So you flash a light bulb in someone's face, and the different parts of the visual network light up simultaneously. And what happens is those networks, the hardwired breaks down. So you have the same amount of neural activity, but you have all of a sudden, like when you're having a journey, tripping, you can see sounds, and vice versa. And because these different parts of the brain are no longer networked together, the ego essentially dissolves because the ego is accessing different parts of your brain that it usually can't. So you were quite, when you say you can see things differently, your brain is seeing things differently. It is accessing parts of the brain that usually it doesn't. And so you can see on a neurologic level what we experience phenomenologically.
That's amazing. That's amazing to hear, because it's, like I said, it's so intuitive to how I feel that I know that I'm accessing different parts of my brain. I know that that's taking place. And because I've never, like I said, I'm very aware, just as as I go through my life experience, I'm very aware of what I'm thinking of and how it's affecting me and how it's, my ability to communicate with others, and, whether I'm in this state or if I'm in a stress state. And like you said, it dissolves that. It all goes away. It takes it away, and I'm literally able to see things completely differently. And I knew, and it's so funny. I don't have access to that. I can't say, it would be great if I could. Like, maybe there's some studies that I could probably enroll myself in or something. But I would love to be able to, to take mushrooms and to see what happens with my brain when I'm taking them, and how I'm having these conversations and how things are changing for me. Like but I knew, because I don't have access to this, I just knew it was taking place because it happens. And then the cool thing about it, Bryon, is that it's lasting. And maybe you can speak on this a little bit as well. Like it's not like I have the experience and then it goes back to me shifting to the way that I was thinking before. It allows me to say, oh, I've thought that new perspective, that new perspective that I have, I carry that with me long after the drug is gone, long after the compound is gone from my system.
That's very cool. I'm thrilled to hear that. I think that probably, I don't think I've seen studies in terms of looking long term to see if these, I know in terms of what people report, it persists, but I think this is also largely, I'm guessing here, that you continue to work on what you learned. Either with a therapist you did reintegration, or you personally did reintegration. That a lot of people have these noetic, experience where they experience the oneness, they see things in a different way, but then they forget about it. Whereas to really integrate is where the work comes in, which is.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that's I've done this with guides and stuff like that before, and then we've had integration sessions and that have followed up, and those have been, and it really is all about the integration afterwards. It's because I'm such a deep thinker that I'm constantly thinking about it. So I thought about, like, oh my God, how was I able to have a different perspective of that thing that I was just like so sure of, or I was so certain in my mind that this was the way things were, and now my brain has been opened up to it. So I think something differently, or I'm open to thinking something differently. So then I integrate on that 100%. I journal on it, I write on it. So that's why it's probably being taken forward in my brain, and that's how I think we can, that leads me to believe that, hey, we can, people who have alcoholism or stuff like that, that's something that's likely hardwired into our brain, hardwired into our ego. And if we can treat, narcissism, all these different types of things, all these different types of addictions, these personality traits that we don't covet, we could work on these things. We could work on these things and create these new, neural pathways that could exist, afterwards and are lasting.
Yeah. I'm very thrilled to hear how this has worked for you, and admire the work you put into this. But it definitely does. It seems to take this reintegration for most people for it to really have an effect. I didn't like the term initially. I don't know if Rick Doblin was coined it, probably not, but he used it, and psychedelic assisted therapy, because I've heard that word used, like medication-assisted therapy for addiction, and I didn't like that term at all. But Rick would talk about that you need the reintegration afterwards. And I've come to see that that's actually true. It's not just popping the MDMA or the psilocybin or peyote. You need to work on it. You need to journal. You need to talk to someone about it. You need to think about it. It's just not going to stay with you, and typically, unless you really put some work into it.
Yeah, it's like it's like with anything. The only way is through, and you really have to do the work to get through. It's just, you can't just take this thing. It's not a silver bullet, guys. Like, you can't just take this pill and you're going to be, take these mushrooms, take this, eat these chocolates, whatever it may be, the way that you're consuming it, and, drinking a tea, whatever it is. And you might not, you're going to have an experience. You are 100% having an experience. But if you don't do the work afterwards, nothing's easy. That part of it's easy. Having the experience and going through it, that part usually is easy. Sometimes it can be more challenging for some others, but you need to learn from that experience. You need to, and then take it forward and apply it into your life. For me, I get all this stuff like, okay, I was being too tense. I was being too stressed out with this, or, hey, I wasn't communicating properly with this person. And then I journal about it, and I figure out upon reintegration, like, oh, that's because I just, I felt this way about myself, and I need to not feel that way about myself. Well, how can I do that? I can't just say, Steve, let's not feel this way about yourself. I have to do work. I have to wake up. I have to maybe do some mantra. I have to go and, show up on time for things, or make sure that I'm doing something that whatever I was having that negative a feeling for, and so it's like, you need to reintegrate. You need to have these experiences that reintegrate you back in, into your, to use them in your life, or it's just going to be, using them for fun. And I will say that you should probably be able to use it for that as well. If you want to go out and you want to, do some dancing, and maybe psilocybin makes you, more free and makes you feel better in your body, then you probably should be able to do that as well. At some point, I think that like right now it's just about treatment, and that's kind of like how it is, but it should be for treatment and for personal growth, because it's not just for, to treat ailments. It's not just to treat people who are sick. It's for people who can, want to personally grow as well.
Definitely. And remember, I mean, almost all of us, if not everybody who's in this space, did it when it wasn't legal, and did it when it wasn't being used for therapy. And like I talked about the experiences I had in college. I mean, this was going out in the woods with friends. And I had wonderfully meaningful experiences that stayed with me and wanted me to study these drugs. I think that was my way of intellectualizing the experience of feeling interconnectedness within the universe. But that was my way. But other people that were, the leaders that are leaders in the field now as scientists, undoubtedly, to me, they had their own experiences that led them into this work.
It's 100. It's like you're called to it. You get called to it because you just are. You have such a profound experience, and you say, "Whoa, that can be so helpful. That's more helpful than anything I've ever studied or anything I've ever learned. Like this can really have, like that's what we're trying to do as." As people who are, healthcare providers, we're trying to help people, right? Like we're trying to make their experience or their sickness or whatever better. And like it's just, that's, I have my experiences, and then it's like, okay, I need to talk. That's why I do this show, right? Like I want to have people on who are talking about this stuff so we can create more of a conversation about it, so it can be more of a comfortable thing. And this is not something I would have felt comfortable talking about 5 years ago. And I feel like the psilocybin and the cannabis and stuff has been a big part of that. And so I feel like people are called to it. You have to have your own experience. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't sitting there, 3 or 4 years ago and taking some mushrooms and taking some psilocybin and being like, wow, this is so impactful, because like, and I have to just, how can I tell more people about this? How can I tell more people that I'm having this experience, and I didn't just have this like, drug experience where I'm going and I'm partying and I'm having fun. Like I'm journaling for the next 2 weeks afterwards, because of this. And I know because of the half-life, this drug is far gone from my system. So like, how can I tell more people about this? How can I get people more, more excited? But yeah, Bryon, I know you got to go, and I just want to keep talking to you about everything. So I hope that we'll be able to do a part 2 at some point, maybe a part 3, a part 4, a part 10. I'm definitely going to be having my questions as I go through my own journeys and just getting some data on this side of the state. So this side of the country. So just where can people reach you if they want to get in touch, or if they want to follow you a little bit? Where can they do that?
I'm not too big on social media. I am on, my name's Bryon, Bryon Adinoff, Adinoff. That should get you to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Best way is probably email adinoff@d4dpr.org. That's for Doctors for Drug Policy Reform. And it's a unique name, so probably just putting Adinoff in, you'll either get me or my brother, and he's not Bryon. Also, just please check out d4dpr.org, and particularly if you're a health professional, but we take anybody as a member, but look at what we're about and kind of check out our organizing principles, and see if you'd like to join us out and help us out. the work we do. So I really, Steve, I really appreciate being able to chat with you. It was fun. It was fun.
That is awesome to hear, and I hope that we will do it again, guys. Definitely get over, to Bryon's website and to check him out and see what he's got going on. And I will, Bryon, I'm going to be in touch, and I definitely hope that we'll have you on again. I had an awesome time today. I appreciate you so much for coming on the show, and we'll hope to see you next time.
Sounds good. Look forward to coming back.
Awesome, my friend. Thanks so much. Have a great day. All right, everybody. That was definitely a giddy up. We had Bryon Adinoff. Definitely check him out. Definitely, reach out to us for any resources, anything you need. Please like, follow, subscribe. Get on the Dr. BeeWell channel. Help us grow this. Help us grow our community. Help us to, get people more excited about psychedelics and cannabis and see how it really is a treatment in this world. So giddy up, baby. We'll see you guys next time.